Do you think you should be running them like SEAL Team 6 and trying to drop these players?
Hi, welcome to How to D&D. My name is Fred Wheeler, and today I want to talk about Dungeons & Dragons, but I have a guest with me, Matthew Perkins, and he's going to hopefully do most of the talking, and we're going to talk about why Goblin Arrows, the very first ambush, why Goblin Arrows is deceptively tough for a Dungeons & Dragons group and the Dungeon Master to run.
Hey everybody, my name is Matthew Perkins. Thanks for having me, Fred. You can find my stuff at matthewperkins.net. I'm very excited to talk about some deadly little gobbos.
So one of the biggest problems I think a lot of people don't understand when they're first playing Dungeons and Dragons, and the starter set is usually for beginners, often when you're entering it, you start off the Lost Mine of Phandelver and nothing else, unless of course you're really, really brave and you go straight for the Curse of Strahd. But that very first encounter, yes, I know exactly what you mean. That very first encounter, the Goblin ambush. It's 4 goblins. They have cover. There's a whole lot of things in place, and people assume that a party will be able to deal with them fairly effectively, provided they have between 4 and 5 characters. So, Matthew, you've run through this at least 3 times, correct?
Yes, once as a player and then twice as a DM, and each time it is a little bit tricky. I've never had the player death here, but I've read plenty of horror stories about players dropping here, and I think I've nailed it down to a couple of reasons. The first is because level 1 players are both, it's the height of squishiness and it's the height of hubris, because you tell them they're heroes, but you give them 5 hit points. The second point is that goblins in general are more powerful than their challenge rating would suggest. And the third is that the layout of this particular encounter, the actual terrain, is pretty in the goblins' favor.
The first time I had a group of 4 players, first time they ever played Dungeons and Dragons 5e, they had played other versions of the game or had been dungeon masters themselves. And one of them decided, in fact, they already knew that they were in an ambush. As soon as I read it out and described the situation, they're like, this is an ambush, Fred. We know what's going to happen. And they said, we'll play along though. And I was like, okay, fine, play along. And so one of them walks up, inspects the saddlebag, and of course, me being the person I am, I just had the goblins stay put and just shoot at whoever messed around with the saddlebag, which is probably what every dungeon master does, rather than reading what the adventure does, because the adventure doesn't really seem to make much sense. So 2 goblins are going to run out in front and 2 are going to shoot. Why would they do that, right? Because it doesn't make an awful lot of sense. So you shoot. The first character went down. The other 3 characters, the players just were like, oh God, this is not good. What do we do now? And so it was bedlam. They eventually sorted out the situation, but at least 2 characters were on their face, and they only just made it. They captured one of the goblins. The second time round, I was a bit more skilled. I was also running through the Lost Mine of Phandelver, and I didn't really want to do it again. And I'd figured out how to use goblins pretty well by then. And there were 7 characters, 7 players. And most of them were fairly experienced. But unfortunately, because I had figured out how to use my goblins, they did not fare so well. They suddenly realized they had a big problem because they didn't know where the heck the goblins were. And so they wound up using cover, the wagon in particular, and then just readying an action, because that was the only way they could figure out how to actually target them. Because in combat, a perception check is your action. Oh, hang on.
Yes.
Now I can't attack. Well, that sucks. So they were all readying actions. And that's how they took out the goblins. Otherwise, they would have been absolutely smashed. And that's 7 characters.
Yeah, and absolutely. And they would need to do that because that's the goblins' kit. That's their MO. They are deceptively tough. Because what a goblin's going to do is every turn it's going to blast away with its crossbow or its shortbow or whatever, and then it's going to use its bonus action to hide. And in this encounter, there are thickets all the way up and down the road. So there's plenty of opportunities for the goblins to be able to use their bonus action hide every turn. and then they get advantage on their attack. And when they have advantage, suddenly have double the chance to crit. And if you crit a wizard, my friend, that is a war crime. Like, that, they are defenseless. Because they've got 5 hit points, you can roll well on that crit, and then you're going to drop them below -5, and they're going to die outright. Like, do not pass go, do not collect 200 gold pieces. It's very violent. And another thing is that the players are completely out of position. You're naturally going to have a couple of players hanging back, right? And then a couple of players looking suspiciously at the horses. Those couple of players that are in the front, if the goblins focus fire, they can pick anybody. They're going to kill them, you know?
Yeah, that's exactly what I found. And for those of you who are thinking, well, okay, yes, so they're going to shoot, stay in the thickets, but they give away their position once they fire. Yeah, but which a smart dungeon master will probably do, and even an inexperienced dungeon master will do, is they will move the goblin to a different location in the thicket and then use their bonus action to hide again. So let's think about what's going to happen on the very first turn and then translate that over to what happens later on. Goblins have a +6 to their stealth modifier. And if you roll a 20-sided dice and you get about average, roll a 10 and don't roll badly. So you have at least a 16, possibly, on average for your stealth check. And you compare that with the passive perception of all the characters. None of them have a passive perception of 16. If you're very lucky and you've done everything right, you could potentially have a 15, but that's about as high as I can imagine you getting it at level 1. So they have surprise. They'll act before you. You won't get to act. That's the first round. They'll have advantage because you don't know where they are, because you can't see them, as you just said. And then once they've done that, they can just continue to basically shoot, scoot, and hide or stealth over and over and over again. And it's probably one of the most diabolical strategies that a dungeon master can use with a goblin, because it's so simple, but it's so effective.
Hey, Fred, here's a question. So we both know that these goblins can be super deadly, but here's the thing. Do you think they should be deadly? Do you think if you're running this encounter as a dungeon master, do you think you should be running them like SEAL Team 6 and trying to drop these players?
Okay, so I always tell my players when they start playing with me is that Dungeons and Dragons is not a game where you just kick in the door and you pretend that you're Rambo. Okay, your job is to act like a SEAL team. It's funny that you use that as a reference. I say you guys are a SEAL team, so that means you have to think like a SEAL team, act like a SEAL team, and if you do that, you'll do pretty well. If you don't, you will do badly. 50% of almost all encounters in Dungeons and Dragons tend to be an ambush of some kind set up by the dungeon master or the adventure itself. The players are always on the back foot in terms of that. In terms of should it be that way? Yes. I think it should be tough, but I don't think that dungeon masters need to think in terms of my goblins are going to follow this procedure till the very last man or the very last goblin. Yeah, there is a point, where a goblin getting hit once, they get hit one more time, they're dead. I encourage dungeon masters, when a goblin gets hurt, have them run away. I don't care about everybody else. I just care about myself and staying alive. and since I can hide and I can disengage and dash and all those sorts of things, nobody's going to catch me provided I have cover. So I should be fine. And that's how I would play the goblins in this case. It's actually what I did the second time round, where I had my goblins. The adventure says once you get down to one goblin, then it flees. And I would say that getting down to one goblin and then they decide to flee, no. I think the goblins would probably run away as soon as they are outnumbered. As soon as there's more of the enemy than themselves, I think that's the point they would probably run. Now, if they're dealing with a large group and there's 4 of them and you are tempted to increase the number of goblins, I would encourage dungeon masters not to do that. I don't think you need to. I don't think it's necessary. But I would say, as soon as you lose one member of your goblin troop and they are, the players are outnumbering them, then I would have them run away because they can come back and deal with the characters some other time if they really wanted to.
Yeah. And I like the idea of having goblins run away. I do leave it till the last one, just because when I have a creature run away in general, what I want from the players, what I'm prompting them for, is I want them to chase, because I've got all these homebrew chase rules and I love to roll dice whenever I can. And it's a lot easier for me to manage mentally the mental load of the characters chasing one little goblin boy rather than them chasing two little goblin boys that are, erratically splitting up and trying to distract the party. So I do leave it to the last goblin to flee, but that last goblin, he runs towards the Cragmore hideout so that when the players do win this fight, as I want them to, we're advancing the story. If they chase this goblin, they're running towards more prepared content.
I always sort of, particularly new players, I will always point out to them that if you're up close and you're not at range and you down a monster, I'm going to ask you whether you want to kill it or you just want to knock it out, because often players forget that. And this is their opportunity, whether they realize it or not, to take a captive. And I, particularly with this first encounter, I will say, look, I think I had one person who decided to be crazy and they just rushed into the bushes in the desperate hope they would just run into one of the goblins. They did, by accident. And they downed it because they didn't have to deal with all the other things that were going on. The rest of the party had to contend with the missile fire. Do you want to kill it or do you want to just knock it unconscious? And they thought about it and said, I want to knock it unconscious. And so then they could bring it back, interrogate it, figure out where the Cragmore hideout is. And that's how I led the players into that. And another situation, I believe, it turned out slightly different. And they just basically, I just said, okay, there's a blood trail. And I let them follow the blood trail because there were no goblins left. Nice and easy.
Okay. You just tickled something deep in my soul, because when you said blood trail, I was like, well, I want to follow the blood trail. Like, I'm interested in the blood trail. Dude, I just realized as well, that's probably Gundren's blood. Because this encounter's about kidnapping Gundren. That's their buddy's blood.
Well, it's not necessarily Gundren. It could be Sildar Hallwinter, couldn't it?
Oh, it could. Okay, yeah, I'm less sentimental about him.
But yes, those are the reasons why I think, and you've hit on most of them pretty nicely, that this encounter is really difficult for players to deal with. And if you've never played Dungeons and Dragons, you're never going to understand that goblins can do things like disengage, dash, and hide as a bonus action because of a thing called nimble escape, And that's just brutal. And the only way to really effectively deal with that situation is to use cover as a player and to simply set up a ready action for a ranged attack. Unless, of course, you think you are going to strike it lucky and just rush into the bushes and hopefully you'll trip over one of them.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's a good chance that if you don't employ proper strategy in this fight, which not a lot of new players are going to be able to do, intuitively, then you might be in a little bit of trouble. I just wanted to add one last little point in that if the goblins do win, because we're saying there's a good chance that could happen, you don't need to kill the party. They've captured Gundren, they've captured Sildar. So I've seen a lot of dungeon masters, when they do win with their goblin SWAT team, then the players all wake up in the cave with Sildar, and then suddenly we've got an escape storyline as they chew through their bonds and they have to fight Ymik in the goblin den, which is also an interesting way for this story to go. Just because you win the fight as the dungeon master doesn't mean the campaign's over.
Absolutely, I totally agree. So I think we've covered pretty much everything, Matthew. I think we've nailed down all the bits and pieces to this particular topic. I have to say, really thank you for coming and chatting about this, because I've talked about the topic before and I know it's popular. It is probably the most commonly discussed issue for the Lost Mine of Phandelver on the forums. And it probably will continue to be for many years to come. But hopefully people will have enough tools out there that they can deal with it effectively now.
Absolutely, and I'm glad you invited me on, because this is a fantastic adventure, well worth running and well worth talking about. Hey, if you're okay with it, I'm just going to plug my stuff real quick. I've got a website. It's matthewperkins.net, and I'm also making my own little web series about Lost Mines of Phandelver. It's how to run this campaign in just 7 sessions, and I cover every single little aspect for every kind of dungeon master. You're going to love it. Fred, thank you so much for having me.
Thank you for coming on. I do enjoy this. I'm hoping you'll come back and talk more about the Lost Mine of Phandelver. And as Matthew's already pointed out, you should go and check out his website, the YouTube channel, and go and check out his video series on the Lost Mine of Phandelver, because there are more coming.
Cheers.
Okay, so if you want to support Matthew, go and subscribe to his channel. You can subscribe to my channel. You can share, like this video. That's up to you. Hit the bell button, all those sorts of things. Make sure to turn on notifications if you actually want to be informed when there's a live stream or if there's actually a new video, which happens quite a bit. If you want to support my channel, I'm sure that Matthew has his own Patreon and other stuff that you can go and support. I have Patreon as well. I have affiliate links. We both have those, I'm pretty sure. I have a merchandise shelf underneath my videos. And also you can just watch our videos. Watch my videos, watch Matthew's videos. And please, hey, where the hell is the dice?
Cancel the production. It's done.
And hey, till next time, keep rolling those 20s.